Hey Ottawa, this is your Monday market snapshot for the Ottawa real estate market for Monday, October 21st, 2024. My name is Annalie Rice, and every week I bring you the details of what's going on in the Ottawa real estate market. Let's see what's happened this last week. First, let's look at the citywide stats. We see that overall the inventory climbed just slightly, up by 10 this past week. It was up slightly for all property types, very steady for the detached market. For solds in the last week, we had a drop of 61, which is understandable with the long weekend having been last weekend. Most notably, it's in the townhome market. There it was the biggest drop by far. Here's the inventory breakdown in graph form. You've got the overall inventory in black at the top, which slightly decreased this week, while the active inventory, that's the green line, increased slightly this week. Interestingly, this is the week last year that had the peak inventory. And I looked back at the numbers, and what we were sitting at last year was 2,499 active listings at this week last year, and that was the peak. And it dropped off fairly significantly, fairly quickly after this peak inventory. And you can look at this year, it's been a totally different story. We've sort of been sitting up at around that 2,800 inventory. Right now we're sitting at 2739. So we're at about 10% more inventory this week than we were at the same week, which was the peak last year. Sales, although they dropped off this week, that was as a result of the long weekend. We'll look at that on the next slide. But they have been significantly higher this year than they were last year. This chart shows us the new listing breakdown, and this past week we had 378 properties that came to the market. Interestingly enough, it's basically the identical numbers as we had last week. It was down by 2, and then 115 properties, or 30%, were relisted. That is the exact same number of relisted properties as last week. And the number of new to the market listings were 263, which was just down by 2 from last week. So interestingly, all three of those numbers almost identical from last week, which was the week of the long weekend, heading into the long weekend. So, but the sales is what dropped off. We can see there the big drop off. We do expect that to climb back up next week. There's a lot more conditionally sold properties right now than even there were last week. So expect that to rebound up and then slowly taper off throughout the fall as we get closer to the winter. Okay, this last week we had 179 sales, and 15% of those sold with no conditions. 21% of the sales were at or above asking price. And I just wanted to point out, if you look sort of larger scheme there, the first chart there, the no conditions one, is going back to January of 2023. And you can definitely, if you put an average line across there, it's come down quite significantly from up kind of like 25% down to about the 15%. So we're definitely on a downward trend of no condition offers. Even places that are selling quite quickly are a lot more often having conditions, which is great for buyers. For the at or above asking, that also has come down. That chart only goes back to January of this year. That's when I started tracking that. But we can see that it also has decreased over time. So definitely, as we're moving more into a balanced market, the elevation of active inventory, it's had an effect on the sales, where there's more options for conditions, and less pressure to be offering at or above asking. So the sales within the first 7 days this last week, we had 11 properties that sold within the first 7 days. It was only 6% of the sales. 57% of those sold with no conditions, and 55% at or above asking price. With sales within the first 30 days was 46% of the sales, which was 83 properties, and 16% of those with no conditions, 34% at or above asking price. I like to look at what the details are of those that sold at or above asking price. And so this week there were 37 homes sold at or above asking price. 18 of those sold for up to 1% over asking, about half of them at asking. That represented 49% of those sales. 14 homes, or 38%, sold between 1 and 5% above asking. And then the final 5 homes, which represented 14% of those sales, sold above 5% of asking. The highest percent over was 14% over, and it was also the same one for the dollar value, 60,000 over. That property was a tenanted 1960s detached bungalow near South Keys, 3-bed, 2-bath. It was listed for 440 and sold for 500. They did have an offer date and time. So in that case, it's possible that they just wanted to list a little low to try and have all the showings rather quickly rather than disturbing tenants for a longer period of time. It's not a bad strategy when you're disturbing your tenants and making them live through showings and such for a long time. So not too bad. Of the 5 properties that sold for more than 5% of their asking, 3 of them had offer dates and times. I did want to point out one of them. It was a townhome that originally had been listed at 550,000, had worked through multiple price drops down to 500,000. Then I guess they really wanted to sell, so they dropped it to 450, set an offer date and time, and then sold over asking by about 6 or 7%, and sold for 480. So that one's a little bit false to say that it sold over asking. Like, it had been on the market for 130 plus days. It ended up selling for about 9% below its original asking price, or about 4% below what it was listed for before they set that offer date with the artificially low price. Anyways, it just sort of gives you an idea of how pricing can happen through different strategies. Next, we'll look at the different what's happening in the different regions of the city. In the central urban region, which is inside the Greenbelt, we've got a slight drop in inventory for detached in town, steady for condos, and sales were down across property types, most notably for condos. Most likely this has a lot to do with the long weekend, less people out shopping and fulfilling conditions and such during and around the long weekend. In Canada and Stittsville, we had an increase for inventory for detached and condos, just slight drop for townhomes, and sales were down across property types, most notably in the townhomes, although that was a bit of a spike last week for the townhome sales. A bit of a mixed bag for Barrhaven and Riverside South. We have a drop in the active inventory for detached and condos, but an increase for townhomes. The sales were up for detached and condos and down for townhomes this last week. And finally, in Orleans, we have steady inventory for detached, slightly down for townhomes and slightly up for condos. And sales were down across property types across Orleans, most notably in the townhomes there. Here's the full data for residential detached homes and for the townhome market. And finally for the condo market. Okay, so fairly quick update this week, and I hope that you have a fantastic week. Get out and enjoy this beautiful summer-like weather we're having for the next couple of days before I'm sure that we're going to start seeing more seasonal and fall-like weather. Winter's going to be a bit of a shock after all this warm weather that we've had. Hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you next week.